Welcome to the Ehuntr newscast presented by Vortex Optics.
Kind of taboo here to hunt in the rut. Our public doesn't like it. Look, this will be a rut hunt.
It's just good knowing the regulations going into it. You know, you want to go in as prepared as possible.
So if you want one of these, you'll have to burn your limited entry deer points on it.
Hello and welcome back to the Ehuntr newscast. I want to start off today by thanking everybody for your love and support that you've been giving us on this podcast. We had a lot of great messages come in from our past podcasts, especially the one that we did on wolves in Colorado. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it, I encourage you to go and download that podcast and listen to it. It's got a lot of great information in it. But the comments that have come in have been very supportive and appreciative, and we want to just thank you for your support and your help in getting this podcast up and going. I also want to take a minute and thank our banner sponsor, Vortex Optics. I just posted a video on Instagram tonight about, it was a video of a moose that I had recorded on a recent hunt. And it is amazing when you're looking through those razor spotting scopes of how clear you can get, especially when an animal's a long ways away. That moose that I was looking at was quite a ways away, and it was still just as clear. In fact, you could still see the frost on the antlers of the moose as well as on the moose's back. So I want to give them a huge shout out. They're an awesome sponsor, an awesome partner, and just truly enjoy their products. If you haven't had a chance to use some of their products, I encourage you to do that as well. They've got some amazing stuff from binoculars, rifle scopes, spotting scopes, range finders, a lot of good stuff. So go to vortex.com and check out their stuff. On today's podcast, I sit down with Kobe Jones, who's the big game coordinator for Utah's DWR, as well as Mike Wardle, who's a wildlife biologist for the DWR there in Utah. We talk about the mule deer plan, and this is actually going to be part one of this conversation that I have with them. This conversation will be strictly towards the mule deer plan, the changes, and some of the new hunts that Utah is coming out with. So if you haven't heard of these new hunts, stay tuned because we talk about them extensively. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, please give us a like and subscribe to our podcast. And without further ado, here's my interview with Kobe and Mike. All right, well, welcome to the Ehuntr newscast. I'm joined by a couple of guests today. Really excited to have these gentlemen on. They're very, very talented men in their field, and I really appreciate them taking the time with me today. So with me today in today's podcast, I have Kobe Jones, who is the big game coordinator for Utah's Division of Wildlife Resources, as well as Mike Wardle, who is a wildlife biologist for the DWR as well. Welcome to the call, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. Super excited.
I'm glad to have you guys on, and I really appreciate your guys' time. I know you guys as state employees, as biologists, you guys are extremely busy, so I really appreciate your time. And if you guys wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, telling us a little bit about you, where you're at, where you cover, and those kind of things.
So this is Mike Wardle. I'm the wildlife biologist out of Fillmore. So I cover the Pavant and the Beaver and the Oak Creek units. So my main job is I'm kind of make recommendations for all of the huntable wildlife in my units. So my job is to kind of inventory and estimate population levels, and then also make recommendations for hunts and permit numbers and all that fun stuff. So I kind of do the biology side behind it for those three units.
And you do all wildlife, right? Not just big game?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So I work with upland game and small game animals too.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm Kobe Jones, and I work specifically with big game. So in the state, we have regional biologists that gather a lot of the data, and then we have in Salt Lake we have coordinators, and coordinators. I always say, regional biologists, their workload is spread a mile wide and an inch deep. And coordinators, it's exactly the opposite. It's an inch wide. I focus only on big game, but a mile deep. Work with all the biologists to summarize all the data, and come up with good hunt recommendations that make sense. Also, one of the other responsibilities is to make sure that we have current statewide management plans for all the species in the state, that we're following those plans, and that we're managing the way that we've agreed to manage. We always say in wildlife, there are a lot of right ways to manage wildlife. A lot of what we do is social. There are certain things, though, that are biological, and we'll let the public know when we're going to cross a line and say, hey, this is a bad idea, and here's why. And that's how we view our role. But I'm lucky enough to work with several biologists like Mike on big game issues, research projects, and permit recommendations.
And so you covered the entire state, correct?
Yes, I do. Yep. I work out of the Salt Lake headquarters office and statewide.
Awesome. Well, you guys are perfect for this call and the questions that I have regarding this podcast. Most of it is centered around mule deer in Utah. Utah is well known in the West as one of the best states in the West to hunt mule deer. I'm actually from Utah originally, grew up my entire life hunting mule deer in southern Utah. I appreciate your guys' hard work and really all the biologists, all the state employees, and their contributions to have allowed me to hunt or mule deer in Utah my entire life. So I'll start off with that, and thank you both for your work and everything that you do for us as hunters and allow us to enjoy our passion. So to get into this, we've done several articles on our website, ehuntr.com, and recently about Utah. There's been several changes in Utah as far as the big game plan, and especially as it applies to, or as it pertains to, mule deer. And so what I'd really like to spend the majority of our time today talking about is mule deer, the numbers of mule deer in Utah, and the new mule deer management plan in Utah. So let's start there with the new mule deer management plan. And Kobe, I'll lean on you on this one. Can you tell us a little bit about this new mule deer plan and what's been proposed, what's been actually put in place, and some of the details regarding that?
Yeah, I certainly can. So Utah, most of our management plans for big game are updated every 5 years. So we came to the end of the last time's mule deer management plan, and we put a group together and rewrote it. When we write one of these management plans, because there is a lot of social, we form a committee, and it's pretty intense. We spent over 40 hours together as a committee rewriting this plan. And some of the things that came out of it when we surveyed our public is that there is a lot that the public wants to stay the same. The public seems to like the 3-tiered system that we have in Utah. We have general season units, and then we have limited entry units, which there are more bucks on the landscape in the limited entry units, but it takes longer to draw, and that's a separate point system. And then inside that limited entry system, we have 2 premium limited entry units, the Ponsadont and the Henry Mountains. And it feels like our public at least really, really likes that. And so there's a lot that we learned the public kind of wanted to keep the same. Some of the changes that we made were to use the last 5 years, we've started to collect a lot more data. And some of the changes we made are to use that data to more proactively manage mule deer. And so what I mean is that in the population section of the plan, to take a really hard look at what our current populations are, and then tie that back to body condition scores. So in Utah, every year we have a major capture effort on mule deer. This year, I don't want to get the number wrong. Let me look at it really quick. I think we caught over 860 mule deer in December.
Wow.
And every one of those, we got a total ingest of fat on. So how fat are they heading into winter? And then we monitor those animals to look at survival. We look at fawn survival. We look at adult survival. And so there are a couple things that came out of this plan. And they don't seem like big changes, but really they kind of are. One of them is, are we managing at the appropriate level on the landscape? So now I'm not talking bucks, I'm talking population levels. And to take a look at herd health, and it directs the biologists, because we don't set population objectives in the statewide plan. We set those in unit plans. We have 29 units, and in each unit plan we set the population objective. And the statewide plan says, okay, as a biologist in your district, take a hard look at what your body condition is, take a hard look at what your population levels have been over the last 10 years, and let's set a realistic population objective that's attainable and we can still have have a healthy herd with. Another one of the changes would be the appendix. I don't know if we want to get into the appendix now with the CWD plan or.
Yeah. What is that about?
Okay, let's talk about one more change. So the other big change to hunting was that, and this is buck hunting now, and that is that before, the best data we had were just to use buck-doe ratios, 3-year average, and trend. But in these general season units, you're highly dependent on your fawn crop. You're highly dependent upon those yearling bucks coming in. And now that we have better data on fawn survival and fawn collars, we allowed the biologists some latitude to really take a look at not only what are their buck-doe ratios, what are the trends, but what does your fawn survival look like, and what is that going to look like coming into this next year, and how will that influence how we either make a recommendation to increase or decrease permits.
And I just say that's really important for me as a regional biologist, because the statewide plan is ultimately what gives me direction and sideboards on what I can and can't do when recommending permit numbers, and this allows us to use all the data that we have in hand in order to try and be more proactive, and try and either reduce permits when we need to beforehand, before we hit a crash, or increase permits when that opportunity is there.
So what are you doing in your territory, Mike, specifically from what you're seeing? Or are you more on that taking permits away or adding more permits based on what you're seeing?
So we haven't gone through we don't have all of our data back yet. We make our permit number recommendations here in a month or two, once we have like all the harvest data and which comes from surveys of hunters. We don't have all that information back yet, and all our survival information. But just looking at my classification data that I did through November and December, most all of my units will have some type of a decrease. My buck to doe ratio has come in really low, and I mean lower than the objective. And my fawn to doe ratio has been really low for the last 2 or 3 years on both the beaver and pavant, and as well as the Oak Creek. Okay. So in my district, deer numbers have declined substantially in the last few years, and we've put on some collars on the beaver unit this year, and in order to try and understand better what's going on with these deer. And one of the things that was interesting to me was, Kobe mentioned when we do these deer captures, we do ultrasounds and we take a bunch of measurements that gives us an idea of how much body fat these deer have. And the beaver came in really low this year, which, points to we may have some habitat issues during the summer range, that we can try and, make some efforts in improving summer range so that the deer can put more fat on. But yeah, as of right now, though, there's likely going to be a decrease on my units.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's actually a good kind of segue. We won't get to it yet, but something else I want to talk about on this podcast, or the numbers of deer in Utah. But let's finish up the mule deer management plan and the other changes that you were talking about, Kobe.
Absolutely. So, overall, very few changes. That is one of the biggest changes that came to general season hunting, is just being able to consider more than just buck duration trend. Another change was looking at a few more opportunities to hunt deer and stuff that we haven't tried in Utah. The hams hunt, for example, was one of the things that came out of the mule deer plan. It's a handgun archery, muzzleloader, and shotgun hunts. And what these were designed to do is really kind of offer a more primitive type hunt. So the rule behind these is that you can use any handgun, archery, muzzleloader, shotgun that fits the definition that we wrote in rule, and then they have to be open sights. And the season dates on these are actually quite late. I know you're out of Colorado, right?
Correct.
Okay, so in Colorado, you guys have third and fourth deer seasons with rifles. But in Utah, it's kind of taboo here to hunt in the rut. Our public doesn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
But this will be a rut hunt. We're going to try it out on 3 units with what we're trying to make is a more primitive hunt, primitive weapon type hunt, using modern weapons but removing the optics, and see how the public likes it,
So which units? You said that's going to be in 3 units. Which units will that be open to?
This year we have it recommended on a portion of the Book Cliffs. It's the Book Cliffs Floyd Canyon. We have it recommended on the Kaparowitz unit, and we have it recommended on Morgan South Ridge.
And is that just mule deer hunts, or will there be other species involved in those hams hunts?
For right now, it's just mule deer. I think the goal would be to possibly expand this to elk and other species, but for right now, it's just mule deer.
It's really a really interesting hunt, because you're right. I mean, like I said, I grew up in Utah, and yeah, hunting in the rut is something that has been kind of taboo in Utah, because we spend Thanksgiving looking at all these bucks and we're all angry because we didn't see any of them during the deer hunt in October. And then it comes time for the rut and Thanksgiving time, and we're like, where have these things been? And so yeah, it will be really interesting having a rut hunt in Utah. I love the approach, though, making it more primitive, taking, because Utah, at least as I remember, you can use a scope, a high-powered scope on a muzzleloader on the general and the limited entry hunts. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can. So on the regular muzzleloader season, you can use a scope, absolutely, a magnifying scope.
Okay. So, but in this hunt, you lose that advantage, and same with all the other, the archery, the shotgun, the handgun, can't use scopes on anything like that. So I like that. It's more of a primitive. So let's jump down this rabbit hole a little bit with the hams hunts while we're talking about it. Those units that it's on, what was the reasoning behind those specific units, or having the hams hunts on those units?
So in the plan, when we wrote the plan, we set a criteria as to where we would evaluate. We said areas with low deer density that are underutilized by hunters, or areas maybe that have a high potential for human conflict, or also to look at areas where we have migratory deer populations. And so when we set up that criteria, every one of these fits a portion of that criteria. When we look at an area like the Kaparowitz, super low deer densities, and you can hunt a long time there, even in November, and not find deer. We look at an area like the Book Cliffs Floyd Canyon on the south end there. We have deer there that are just unavailable during all the other seasons, but they come down out of some steep rocky cliffs and inaccessible areas to where they are more available. And same Morgan South Ridge, a lot of that summer range is private. And so they come down onto public land and they become accessible. And so every one of these fit that criteria. And that's when the committee helped write the plan. They were comfortable with the hunt, comfortable with the idea, but they wanted to set some sideboards as to when and where we'd call these. And to be honest, there will be very few permits assigned to these the first couple of years, just to see how the public likes it, get the feedback, and see if we want to move forward and establish more of these, or if the idea wasn't what we thought it was going to be. We don't know yet.
Will it go to a draw system like Utah normally uses to determine who gets those permits?
It'll go to a draw system, and it'll use the limited entry point system, so the bonus point system, not the preference point system. So if you want one of these, you'll have to burn your limited entry deer points on it.
Ooh, that's a rough one. See, so being out of stater, I'm able to put in for all these species in Utah, so I'm building points and everything right now, and I'm building for, like you talked about earlier, one of those Ponce de Gaunt or Henry Mountain, so I'd have to burn those points to have one of those hams hunts.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, though, the trade-off is that they could be a really good hunt, too.
Absolutely. I really think they could. I mean, it's a rut hunt in Utah, so I'm sure there's not a lot of data behind it, but those could be excellent hunts. Do you see them going to other units in the future? Obviously, I'm probably not going to be able to hunt in any of Mike's units, which that would be awesome if I could in that rut hunt. Give me one of those Pavant tags in the rut. But do you see it going to any other units in Utah in the future?
I do. I absolutely see it expanding if it's something the public wants. A lot of times we'll try something for 2 or 3 years and get feedback first. And if we get positive feedback, we did this. We do have a late season muzzleloader hunt that runs into the first part of November. And we tried that on select units first in the last year plan. After 5 years, we got some really good feedback, and we took that and we expanded it to all units now. So we do have a late season muzzleloader hunt on general season units. That hunt, again, does take limited entry points to draw, but you can hunt that now on any of the general season units. It does end November. The latest it would ever go, our season dates in Utah fluctuate. We don't have hard day openers. The latest it would ever go is November 11th. And this year it ends before that, I think, like November 5th. Yeah.
November 5th?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that'd be perfect for me. Sorry, what was that, Kobe?
On that one, you could use a scope.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay. Well, I'll be really interested in hearing how this comes out. The three of us might have to hop on another podcast at the end of this year and kind of discuss this and see if there was some successes and changes that may need to be made to. I'm sure there will be. That's really anything. It's ever evolving. I think with wildlife management. I'm speaking as a hunter, and I don't know wildlife management, but I would imagine it's ever evolving and things will absolutely have to change. So one more other question that I have with the hams hunts is, are people going to be required to wear hunter orange during those hunts?
So under this, it does not look like you'd be required to wear hunter orange.
Okay. Awesome. And that makes sense because where it's an archery, muzzleloader, I mean, historically in those two hunts, we haven't had to wear orange during those hunts. So it makes sense. I guess the one that I would mostly be afraid of would be I guess not even that, but the handgun or the shotgun. But it would make sense that it wouldn't require hunter orange.
And in the handgun, just so you know, this is not any handgun. That's probably important because there are these handguns out there that really aren't handguns. And so we have a specific definition for handguns in this rule. Muzzleloaders are just muzzleloaders. Shotguns are just shotguns. But handguns, the handgun must have no more than a single barrel, 15 inches or less in length, including the chamber, have a single rear hand grip without any form of a fixed, detachable, or collapsible buttstock, apparatus or extension behind the rear grip capable of being used to steady the handgun against the body while firing, or vertical foregrip, and be no more than 24 inches in overall length. So we intended this to be limited to traditional handguns that meet the foot-pound requirement in Utah. So for big game, to meet foot-pound requirement on deer, you've got to be at least a 357 or bigger. And then, in addition to that requirement, you can't have a buttstock. You can't have any fit, form, or function. You can't steady the gun behind the grip. So that gets rid of a lot of these AR platforms.
Yeah. We see a lot of those, sub, kind of like I don't know what they call it, but more of a compact AR style that would probably be considered a handgun, but that kind of rules those out.
Yeah, it won't allow for them.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's very important for our listeners to know. I don't know that anybody has notified anybody on that, or I have not heard that up until this point, so that's a great point to point out. What about shotguns? Any restrictions there?
No restrictions on the shotgun.
Okay. Gotcha.
So, other than you can't hunt big game in Utah with like birdshot, right? I think double-aught buck is the smallest thing that you can use on big game.
Okay. You can use slugs?
You can use slugs.
Okay. I would imagine that's what most people would use is a slug, but they can use double-aught buck on them.
And we did find it right here. It is in the exceptions. Handgun, archery, shotgun, muzzleloader hunts are an exception.
Okay.
For the hunter orange.
Okay. Good. I think that's a really good thing for our listeners to know as well. It's just good knowing the regulations going into it. You want to go in as prepared as possible And being in a new hunt, it's a new hunt. It's going to be, everybody's going to be guessing a little bit. So it's nice to have that information out there for everybody to know. So, okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, any other changes to the mule deer management plan besides those ones that you've already mentioned?
I think we covered a lot of the big ones, don't you, Mike? I think.
You want to talk about the CWD plan?
Oh, yeah, and we took a leaf. We actually invited some speakers in from Colorado to help us with our CWD plan and help garner some support from this and find out what they did. But we actually have a plan for the first time ever to try and mitigate or manage chronic wasting disease in Utah. And we have chronic wasting disease in 3 main locations spread across the state. We have positives in Unit 16 in the central portion on the Manti and the Nebo. We have positives in Unit 8, 9, and 11 that are more in the northeastern portion of the state, out in and around Vernal and those areas there. And then we have some positives down again on the border of Colorado on the LaSalle's. Since we started monitoring for CWD in 2003, as of last year, we've had 94 positive deer and 2 positive elk, and that's not including the ones that came in positive this year for deer. No elk, but we had several deer come in positive again this year. And what the plan really wants to do is it wants to take a look at where we have chronic wasting disease, how do we slow the spread, and how do we keep prevalence low in those areas. And there are several things that Colorado's done and shown some success. Last time I talked to them, they actually should be publishing some of the data. But one of the things they did is that chronic wasting disease is, for some reason or another, it's much more prevalent in prime age bucks. So a buck ages 4 to 6 years old has a lot higher likelihood of being CWD positive than other animals on the landscape. And it's easiest to target prime age bucks during the rut. And so, in Utah, rut hunts typically are not super socially acceptable, but it may be a management strategy that we use to maintain reduced prevalence on the landscape. Colorado showed that they could have high buck-doe ratios and reduced prevalence simply by using that 4th season to target CWD hotspots. In Utah, we manage our general season units at a lower buck-doe ratio. And that could be one of the reasons why we haven't had as high a prevalence, is just because we don't have a lot of those prime age bucks on the landscape. And so that's another strategy, just to continue doing what we're doing and see if we can't keep that prevalence low. There are several other strategies listed in the plan that we can try that have been demonstrated to have some positive effect on CWD. And we're excited to start this plan and try some of these. That was written as an appendix to the plan. Mm-hmm. It's not actually part of the plan, but as an appendix. And we left it that way because the truth is there is a ton about chronic wasting disease that we don't know.
Right.
And we wanted to leave it open so that as new research or new data becomes available, we could amend it and change it as we needed to.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's across most states right now, is there's just so much unknown with CWD. I've been able to talk to quite a few of the Colorado biologists lately, and there's just so much unknowns how to manage it, and I think that's smart on your guys' part to leave that open for input and adjustments, and so I think that's a really good idea. And I actually wasn't aware that there was that many cases identified in Utah at this point. You hear a lot of it in Montana, Wyoming, and more in Colorado. So it sounds like it's pretty prevalent I shouldn't say pretty prevalent, but it is there in Utah. So that's a really interesting point, though, too, regarding Colorado and their 4th season, to use that in a way to manage CWD and introducing these hams hunts in Utah, kind of at a similar point. So that's a great plan, and I think a lot of people are interested in this new mule deer management plan. Like you said, there's not a lot of changes. I did have one other question along with it. I read somewhere that this was going to be a 7-year plan versus the 5-year plan that Utah has historically done. Is that correct, or is that not correct?
So we proposed it as a 7-year plan, but the Wildlife Board decided they wanted to see us see it be a 5-year plan. And so as it got passed, that was one of the changes that the board made.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. Because and you'd mentioned at the first of the podcast that Utah historically has done 5-year plans, and I just read that this was a 7-year plan. So thank you for that. All right, guys. Thank you for joining us for this part 1 of my conversation with Kobe and Mike. Make sure that you're subscribed to our channel. That way, when part 2 comes out, you'll be notified. In part 2, we go into detail on the mule deer numbers in Utah. We recently did an article on mule deer numbers being up and actually at an all-time high in Utah, and I asked them that question. So make sure you're subscribed so that you get a notification when we publish that next episode, and thank you for listening.